Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast right here on the record with the Ohio Senate. The views the news excludes. I'm John Fortney, your host, the Director of Communication for the Republican Caucus, the Majority Caucus in the Ohio Senate. Great to have back on the program this week State Senator Jerry Cirino, Republican from Kirtland, Ohio. Very interesting last week. A lot of people still talking about the special session. It had not happened for 20 years. The governor calls the legislature into special session to do two things, put Joe Biden on the ballot, but also the important work of banning foreign contributions to attacks on Ohio's Constitution, also known as ballot campaigns. Just your thoughts, looking back to be that part of history in the state Senate that acted first.
Sure, John. Yeah, absolutely. It really was historic on many levels. And I think it spoke to the governor's frustration with lack of activity on the House side of things. He was actually, I thought, quite complimentary of the Senate for passing 3 or 4 bills that were addressing both the Biden ballot issue and the foreign money, sending them over to the House only to see no action taken. So I think the governor got very frustrated, and I certainly can appreciate that. And it was historic in nature, and I think he has the constitutional power, certainly, to call a special session. And I think, the Senate acted very speedily in passing the bills, and the governor ended up getting what he was looking for here. And, the whole issue of foreign money, that's something we really need to spend a lot of time talking about.
Yeah, and it's something that the Senate passed. Senator McCauley, his bill passed in late February, early March, went to the House, never was assigned a committee, so it never received a hearing. And then the Senate also acted to amend other bills which addressed foreign contributions going to issue campaigns. It's already illegal in the state of Ohio for foreign contributions to go to a candidate campaign. All this legislature did, especially in the Senate, took the action to ban and prohibit these donations going to issue campaigns based on what we've seen happening now in prior elections.
This should have actually been called the Protect Ohio Voters Act, because while the other side of the aisle says that this is somehow restricting the voice of the people, there's no basis for them saying that whatsoever, in logic anyway. And maybe in their minds they actually believe that, but there is no logical basis for that comment. The fact of the matter is that Ohioans and only Ohioans should be making decisions on how, when, and where to amend the Ohio Constitution. It's that simple, and we don't need billionaires from Switzerland or from Austria or the Chinese government through their proxies influencing with large amounts of money ballot initiatives. And the other reason this is so important, John, is because if you look at why this is such an important strategy and why the Democrats resisted.
They fought hard.
They fought very hard for it.
They fought very hard for their foreign election interference, for their foreign donors, and their forein campaign.
And the reason for the ballot initiative issue is so important to them is because the progressives in this state, who take their direction from progressives in D.C., let there be no question about that. They cannot elect enough candidates. They don't have any statewide candidates. Sherrod Brown is the lone Democrat for the time being. In Ohio, they can't take out the legislature supermajority that we have right now, and so what their new strategy is, and it's guided by national initiatives, is to go after ballot initiatives. Okay, that's why they fought so hard last year to not get to the 60% threshold, because they want to make it easy, as in 50% plus one, to pass a ballot initiative and enact things in the Constitution. Essentially, it's going around the legislature, and there are a lot of voters who don't want what's on these ballot initiatives. But that's their new legislative pathway.
But if you have $30 or $40 million, that goes a long way to buying ad campaigns toward amending the Constitution. And legislating by constitutional amendment is a terrible way to run the government.
That is not the right way for Ohio. The people have the vote, have the opportunity, and the right in our Constitution to speak out through the voting of their legislative representatives, through the statewide officials, and they can do ballot initiatives. And we've had some very good ballot initiatives, certainly, but it should not be used as the new proxy for legislation that the progressives are unable to pass.
You gave a tremendous floor speech on Tuesday. There were two different sessions during the week. One was on Tuesday. That was the first special session of the Senate meeting. And then on Friday, of course, was the second. But you gave a great floor speech on Tuesday when it was Senator DeMora and others who were talking about how this is toxic to Ohio's Constitution. This is toxic to the voters of Ohio, and that it is tearing down the constitutional rights of the people. And you responded with a great floor speech, which, by the way, you can find on our social media channels on YouTube. Just go to Ohio Senate GOP, where you pushed back and took a stand that we are actually protecting the integrity, not only of Ohio's election integrity, but of the Constitution itself.
Right. And while I certainly supported the bill, I wasn't planning on speaking on the floor that day. But, sometimes when you hear the other side make comments that are frivolous, inaccurate, disingenuous, non-sincere, sometimes you just have to speak up, press the button, and take the microphone, as I decided to do, because it was clearly a misrepresentation of the facts. This bill actually protects Ohio voters and the rights that they have to decide on policy issues in the state of Ohio.
Right. And the governor issued a statement on Tuesday, again applauding the Senate's actions, saying, quote, "I congratulate the Ohio Senate on passing a bill today to both put President Biden on the November ballot, as well as taking strong action to ban foreign contributions in Ohio campaigns. They are both the right thing to do." Then he says, continuing to quote here, "I have been taken aback by how many officials and special interest groups have come out against efforts to ban potential foreign support for ballot initiatives. A foreign contribution ban is needed in Ohio right away to protect the integrity of the Ohio Constitution, our November election, and all future elections. It's the right thing to do."
It's already, John, too easy to change the Constitution. We're one of the few states that make it as easy as we do with 50% plus one. So if you add to that the ease at which the Constitution can be changed with 50% plus one, add to that the billions of dollars or millions of dollars, whatever the number is, that can be inserted into these election initiatives, that is not serving the Ohio people, and it is undermining the Constitution in the state of Ohio.
Well, Democrats also said it's just not happening. It's just not happening. And there were other members of the media that took issue with it's just not happening. But it's very easy to find. NBCnews.com, Politico.com, even Cleveland.com has done stories about foreign contributions coming from the 1630 campaign. And there was an FEC memo that Senator McCauley spoke about. And this is the FEC memo, came out in December of 2023, just last year. And among its recommendations regarding foreign contributions, number 5 says amend the foreign national prohibition to include state and local ballot initiatives, referenda, and recall elections. So even as late as December 2023, the Federal Elections Commission says states need to be banning this on the state and local level.
Right. And we didn't go quite that far, but perhaps it's something that we should be looking at. I think local issues are a wholly different category of initiatives, certainly. But, the issue is where we see evidence of undue influence from outsiders, at whatever level that is, state or local, that's something that we need to step in and deal with.
And there was the narrative, too, that, it's just too hard to track. It's too hard to prosecute. To which I responded to some members of the media about, well, if that was the case, then why does the federal law enforcement agencies, why does the FBI and other agencies prosecute money laundering? I mean, that's RICO. I mean, that's a
very
huge crime.
Complicated to track and to find out who the actual parties are that are engaging in money laundering, and that doesn't stop prosecution, and it shouldn't. I thought the rather other interesting part that we heard from the Democrats during that debate last week was the whole issue of who is going to prosecute in regard to this.
The Attorney
these
General
bills.
is what we
Yes,
passed.
and so the Democrats were saying, well, we don't trust the Attorney General. I guess they become so used to lawfare, okay, at the federal level and in the state of New York and the city of Manhattan, that they probably presume that would be the case. But we know we have an Attorney General who is respectful of the rule of law and civil procedures, and he is going to do a good job, and he's the most qualified to do it because, just like money laundering, prosecuting against these foreign contributions is a very complex international type of an investigation that would have to we would have to undergo. And you can't have a lowly county prosecutor who are great people. I know many of the prosecutors, but they're prosecuting day-to-day crimes in their counties, in cities. You can't ask them to suddenly become capable of and have the staff to handle an international investigation against billionaires who have lots of legal protection.
Right. Not to mention they most likely are living outside of this country.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
I also thought one of the interesting floor speeches from the Democrats that week on Tuesday came from Senator Kent Smith, Democrat from Euclid. And he said, quote, "The reason why the Democrats' convention is after the deadline, the filing deadline to put Joe Biden on the ballot," he said, "is convention dates are often chosen by television schedule." To which I was wondering who's running the Democratic National Committee.
Yeah, I thought that was. I thought Senator Smith's comment on there was kind of laughable. Certainly TV schedules are relevant components in deciding. But look, as I said in my floor speech, the reason we were there on this special session in the first place was because the Democrats screwed this up and missed their deadline. Somebody was not paying attention, and I have felt from the beginning, as a lot of us in the Republican Party, that Joe Biden should be on the ballot. And quite frankly, I believed that if we didn't take action, that the federal courts would have put him on the ballot anyway. Why let him be positioned as a victim?
Well, I was interested, too, that on Friday, Senator DeMora, in one of his floor speeches, said that he knew all along that the Democratic National Committee was going to hold a virtual convention where it would address this, that he knew about this all along and that he was part of the process. At least that's what I inferred from his remarks. And I'm thinking, well, if that was the case, why didn't you say something earlier?
Well, the Democratic National Committee announced 10 minutes before our session.
On Tuesday.
Yeah. That they were going to do a virtual nominating convention. Okay?
Hoping this would all go away.
That was not an accident. The timing was very planned out. Again, I think there was a lot of disingenuous commentary and thinking on the part of our friends on the other side of the aisle.
One of the things that was interesting that when the governor the prior week called the news conference saying that he was going to exercise his constitutional authority to call a special session, he took the House to task, calling their failure to act, quote, simply unacceptable, quote, ridiculous, and absurd. There's also some other inaction that we've been waiting to see what would happen. And one of the bills that we have sent them has cleared a House committee and is waiting for a floor vote. That is your Higher Education Reform Act, or Senate Bill 83. Where does that stand? And in your opinion, why isn't it not getting a floor vote?
Sure, that's a great question, and that's a very important bill. And I think issues on the campuses in the last 60 days, I think have done nothing except re-emphasize the need for higher ed reform. Senate Bill 83, as you know, is the most comprehensive higher education reform bill that we have seen in Ohio. And those aren't my words. Those are the words of the former chancellor, Randy Gardner. It deals with probably a dozen separate issues that are all interrelated into higher education. It's a great bill. I met with the speaker last December for 1 hour in his office and went through the bill piece by piece. I wanted to make sure he understood what the bill was including and that he wasn't just listening to people telling him what was in the bill. And he's a busy guy, has a lot of bills to pay attention to, so I was trying to help out. We had a very productive discussion. He asked some questions, and I think I answered the questions correctly. And a couple of hours later, he met with media, and he told the media that this was a priority bill for him. That was last December. And here we are in June, and there's no action. Now, various reports have come out on the whip count in the House. I have done my own whip count in making phone calls to House members. Some have actually come to me unsolicited. We have the votes. There are the votes to pass this bill in the House. It just needs to be brought to the floor. I have some theories as to why it's not being brought to the floor. Let's face it, I have not had any amendments suggested to me from the House, from the Speaker, no alternative approaches, nothing that would look to amend the bill as it stands. I think what's happening is that there's pressure from the minority leader and the Democrats over there that are being pressured to not support higher education reform. And that is causing the roadblock right now.
Much like we saw the Democrats during the special session fight hard for foreign campaign donations to campaigns that would attack the Ohio Constitution, fighting hard for foreign donors and foreign election interference. Are they fighting hard for the higher education lobby in Ohio? And what kind of lobby is that? Is that a powerful lobby?
Well, the largest lobby that is in opposition to Senate Bill 83 is the Association of University Professors, okay?
On Tenure Island, that probably comes from.
Tenure Island, and I should mention that the Ohio State president of that of the Ohio State group for the IUP is a tenured Marxist professor who has commented on the bill publicly on many occasions. And we see him for exactly what he is. Certainly, we'll talk about him some other time,
yes.
but or at a different point in this. But look, I think the issue is that this bill was ahead of its time. When I introduced this bill at the beginning of the General Assembly here, we passed it in the Senate in June of last year, in about 3 months from introduction. And we had robust hearings. You may recall one of my hearings lasted 7.5 hours, mostly opposition. I listened to everybody. We made some changes after that point, and we are now at the -11 version of the bill in the House, and it needs to get passed. Other states have now caught up to us and are actually moving ahead of us. Ohio needs to be not an also-ran state. We need to be out there in front of issues, developing good policies that make sense for higher ed.
In your higher education symposium, the first one that's been held in Ohio, that was held in the atrium of the Ohio State House, you and President Huffman hosted it. All the trustees from the public universities, many of them came in. And your message to them was, you are in charge of your universities. The tenured faculty is not. And one of the professors that came from, I believe, the University of Pennsylvania, gave an eye-opening panel speech during part of the panel discussion. You can find that on our Ohio Senate GOP YouTube page. And also, we've written about it extensively right here on the record as well, talking about the danger of faculty, far left faculty, hiring through discriminatory processes, far left faculty, and how the trustees need to understand what is happening on their campuses.
I mean, the hiring has been self-perpetuating a specific line of thought. There has been no diversity in faculty, okay? I call it litmus testing, which we deal with in the bill, where we've seen, and it's beginning to change, but what we have seen is that hiring faculty or staff, for that matter, that it takes on different positions at different universities, but basically what they all have been doing up until recently is requiring applicants or candidates for jobs, again, teaching or staff, to write an essay about DEI and how they would incorporate that into their job, into their teaching, and or being subjected to interviews where they had to answer questions the right way.
And one of the professors said some of these very qualified candidates didn't even make it through the first filter because of DEI, division, exclusion, and inequality.
Not to mention how many professors or staff members, good professional people that we could use, didn't even bother to apply, knowing that litmus test was being applied.
It's interesting how some universities are repealing that now.
They are. Ohio State, a year ago, voluntarily repealed their practice of litmus testing. So I think Senate Bill 83, John, is is having an impact in many regards. You mentioned the trustees. One of my messages to the trustees last year, and we're having our second symposium on October 7th coming up this year in the Senate atrium, is that we said, look, I'd like it if we didn't have to pass laws to fix all these problems. You guys have, as trustees, have a fiduciary responsibility and the authority in Ohio law to make policy changes that are going to be good for the university and good for students. Step up to the plate here and take action on your own, and don't wait for the legislature to do it. If you don't, we will. But I'd much rather have it be done outside of revised code, wherever it can be done.
Right. The trustees are in charge of the university. The president is not, and they should encourage the president to tell them bad news, maybe that they don't want to hear, but often I think some of them feel like, based on what we heard in the symposium, they don't always get the straight message. Right?
The most compelling moment at the conference last October was when Sean Buskin, who is the Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and he works with the universities, because the Attorney General's office for the public universities is their attorney, okay? And they each have individual in-house counsel. So Sean was talking about the Supreme Court decision last June about discrimination in admissions, right? Which is going to have greater ramifications across the board. And one of the things he made a point of saying was that for trustees, if there is a lawsuit, if somebody who was discriminated against for admissions sues the university, the public university, that the trustees do not have qualified immunity from that prosecution. And therefore, they would be responsible for defending themselves. When he said that, there was a hush in the room, and I'll bet you a third of the trustees in that room were lawyers who didn't realize that these are volunteer positions. They don't get paid, and we love our trustees. They put a lot of time in. I've been a trustee. I know how much time you put into it to do it well. But they would be out on their own, providing their own legal defense if there was to be a lawsuit. And that, I think, got their attention.
Yeah, as it should. What do you think about the new president of Ohio State? I mean, he was criticized about, how the campus protests were handled at Ohio State. There were 41 total arrests there last month. Only 16 of them were students. But what you did not see happen at Ohio State were encampments, takeover of university buildings like we saw in Columbia and other universities. And I had a laugh when I saw the one student leader come out from Columbia and address the media that the university needs to feed us. They have a duty to feed us. And I can only think of that great line from the show Justified, where Raylan Givens says, the deputy U.S. Marshal says, outlaw life is hard.
Right. Well, they also wanted it to be gluten-free, so they were quite specific. Look, I've had a number of meetings and conversations with Ted Carter, the new president, from when he was appointed. He reached out to me as I'm chairman of the higher ed committee. We've had numerous meetings. I thought he handled it extremely well. I said so publicly, both in my hearing and in an editorial that I wrote. And I think he handled it well. In fact, he relied on my Senate Bill 135 from the last General Assembly, which precluded state institutions of higher learning from participating in any kind of direct or related boycott of the state of Israel. And because his student and the faculty were asking them to divest of any connections to Israel, and he simply said, it is in revised code. We can't do that.
And time, place, and manner has been very clear case law for some time. I wanted to bring up some of the coverage of that, and I think it really calls to this question out about who is educating and serving the students and the families of those students in Ohio that take out tens of thousands of dollars worth of loans. A story from the Dispatch, May 2nd, Ohio State students, faculty speak out for Gaza and against university reaction to the protests. And this is from that story. Prabnov Johnny also came out in support Wednesday. Johnny, an Ohio State English professor and faculty advisor of Students for Justice in Palestine, said the university's, quote, disingenuous citation of the anti-boycott bill as its reason to shut down a student referendum on divestment and, quote, the egregious use of outside agitator narrative by President Ted Carter were infuriating. His quote, "How dare they say anything negative about my students," Johnny said to the crowd through a megaphone. Now, Students for Justice in Palestine, in which this Professor Johnny is their faculty advisor, this is a screenshot of the cover photo from their Twitter account, and it says, "From the river to the sea." What is happening on college campuses? Who is educating your children? And you don't need to be a history major to understand what from the river to the sea means.
Well, gosh, we could talk about that one for a long time, but I'll narrow it down to a couple of thoughts. First of all, he is as I've referenced to before, he is not representing the what I believe to be the core values in the state of Ohio, certainly that our educators should be relying upon. Look, I've talked with a number of the protesting students around the state. Most of them don't even know where Gaza is. They don't know certainly the history and what's going behind the conflict in the Middle East in the first place, and so they're not being properly educated on history at all.
Or current events. Remember the heinous terror attack on October 7th, rather, of last year.
And they've forgotten about the hostages that still remain in the hands of Hamas. And again, my Senate Bill 83 would allow for people to have an opinion of whatever they would like. If somebody wants to have an opinion that is contrary to your belief, that's fine. But when they're looking to change policy or have the institution make a statement in support of one policy versus another, that is not allowed under my bill.
Here's how outrageous this was. So in the Wall Street Journal on May 31st, there was an editorial that came out by the Wall Street Journal editorial board. And it says, if your local campus anti-Israel protester is feeling dejected after the end of an encampment, tell her to buck up. Here's what Al-Qaeda's central leadership had to say in a May 23rd statement. This gets to my point about who's educating your children on college campuses. The quote from the letter says, this is from Al-Qaeda, "As we support the assassination and beheading of Zionist unbelievers, so also we value and appreciate the movement of Western protesters and occupiers from among the students of Western universities who by their occupying and protest have expressed their rejection of the ongoing genocide in proud Gaza." So these students are being endorsed. What a wonderful political endorsement by terror groups around the world, including Iran's Shiite Supreme Leader, not to be outdone. Quote, "Dear university students in the United States of America, this message is an expression of our empathy and solidarity with you. As the page of history is turning, you are standing on the right side of it. You know you're a useful idiot when, in other words, you have now formed a branch of the resistance front." I mean, it's chilling. Truly, parents, moms and dads in Ohio should be shocked at a level of, are we sending our students to the right universities here?
Well, I like to look at that episode here from the standpoint of, why are they writing these letters to American students? Why do they think that's going to be effective in any way, right? And obviously, we understand that these represent evil regimes in the case of there being a country or Al-Qaeda as an organization. But the reason they're reaching out to American students is because they believe that there are willing listeners on campuses, faculty and students. They may be uneducated. They may not be aware of the true history of the Middle East conflict, but they're doing that because they know there are people willing to receive their message and to just believe what they say without checking the facts, because so many of our students, because of the faculty, have not been trained to try to parse through information and arrive at their own conclusion. They have been indoctrinated to a certain line of thinking.
That America is the great evil.
And that is the perfect reception for the message from the Ayatollah in Iran and the leaders of Hamas.
Speaking of the Constitution and everything that we've been talking about today, Senate Bill 278 is sponsored by Senator Kirk Schuring, longtime member of the Ohio General Assembly, great colleague of yours. and Senator Steve Huffman, who is a medical doctor, and it makes some amendments to Issue 2 that was passed by voters as an initiated statute, not a constitutional amendment, legalizing the sale of marijuana. And one of the things it does, if you are growing marijuana at home, you may do so, but you would have to sign an affidavit that says, I'm not going to sell it. Much like we did when you were buying fireworks, that you would not set them off in the state of Ohio about a year ago. The Cleveland Plain Dealer editorial board took a real shot at Senator Scheuring in a June 4th podcast, saying Kirk Scheuring seeks to violate the voters' will and intimidate Ohioans legally growing marijuana at home. And now our sleazy legislators are trying to criminalize home-growing marijuana with this technicality provision they're inserting into another law. Sleazy. So is it sleazy to put also Delta 8 products that teenagers can currently buy in gas stations and convenience stores into where the actual medical marijuana, which will become the dispensary for so-called recreational marijuana? And by the way, Senate Bill 278 says you can't smoke it in public, much like you can't smoke cigarettes in certain public areas, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, Quinn is fast and furious with using the word sleazy, but it really applies to sleazy journalism, as a matter of fact, which he has demonstrated on a number of occasions. And I would have two comments on this issue. One is I've been on record as I was against the whole issue of recreational marijuana. We have a mental health crisis in this state.
Long-term use of marijuana has been shown repeatedly in medical journals to be linked to psychosis, long-term mental illness.
Yep, absolutely, and it's a gateway drug. I believe that. I will believe that to my dying
Former
day.
Schedule I drug, right?
But what the Senator Scheuring is attempting to do, and Dr. Senator Huffman as well, with 278, and I think their intentions are in the right place. We do need to put some parameters around legalized marijuana. The voters have spoken; they want it recreational to be available. That's fine. But what Quinn probably doesn't understand is that this was not your traditional constitutional amendment that was passed. It was a change to revised code. And guess who the revisers of code are?
The Ohio
General Assembly, and that's us. And if we want to put some brackets, some parameters around recreational marijuana, we can and we should do those things. And I think his personal shots at Senator Scheuring, who is a great public servant, who has served the people of Ohio and his district extremely well and diligently. He has so much institutional knowledge in both the House and the Senate, and is such a dedicated guy that has been dealing with some very personal difficulties these days and hasn't stopped serving the people in the process. I think that is just a very, very low point for Cleveland.com.
You know, isn't it interesting how they take issue, the editorial board takes issue with having to sign an affidavit calling it at a registry that you won't sell it, your own homegrown, you won't sell it to anybody, which is not a constitutionally protected right. But they would be all for, I'm sure, a very in-depth list of who owns firearms in Ohio, which is a constitutionally protected right to bear arms. Senate Bill 278, so we'll see where this goes, but there were certain things within Issue 2, for example, that the language was backwards, it was wrong. It established, instead of a cap for the amount of THC, right, it was a floor. So it said no less than 35% as a starting base, when it should have been capped, and the language should have said no more than 35%.
There are so many dangers in this whole issue here that I think we're going to see play out in the months and years ahead. You know, I will tell you that one of the things that the proponents pushed really hard during the election process was that this by legalizing it, we would be able to get tax revenue, which will certainly be the case to some extent, but that it would prevent a black market from occurring. Well, I don't know. Somebody took their stupid pills that day, because there's no question that a black market will always exist for these kinds of things.
Get it cheaper.
Once you get it cheaper, and if it's without regulation, and it's going to come from somebody will go below the floor price in the market because they can, and a black market will in fact be created, and it'll be totally unregulated.
Which is why you need to have the Ohio General Assembly and send the people to represent your voice to address these issues as the Constitution continues to be targeted in Ohio. State Senator Jerry Cirino, insightful as always. Great to talk to you. Thanks for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you, John.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.